Hi, welcome to the cross-stitch tutorial. A while ago I was looking for a stitch pattern that blended multiple colors, at least two colors of variegated or hand-painted yarns, and came up with a stitch design or a pattern design that I call a Koigu cross-stitch scarf. And many people have bought the pattern since the time that I published it out on Ravelry. And one of the things that I'm always concerned about is it's very difficult to put in writing the way to accomplish this particular elongated cross stitch here, and so I decided to do a brief tutorial on how to do that. If you have the pattern, it's actually rows 5 and 6 in the pattern, or 11 and 12. Might be 12 and 13, I can't remember, but it's definitely 5 and 6 in the pattern. And so I'm going to show you how to go about and do that. In the pattern stitch, I'm not going to go through the entire pattern, just the 2 rows that make up that elongated cross stitch pattern. So I set up a little swatch of 2 different colorways that I've been using in terms of yarns, and wanted to go ahead and show you that. Now in the pattern stitch, it basically says insert your needle into the first stitch, wrap it 4 times, and pull all 4 stitches through, which is basically that. And basically what that does is it elongates the stitch in such a way that by wrapping it multiple times, it elongates the stitch so that you can actually cross it over. Later on in the pattern, I revised it and came up with a much easier way of doing that. When you wrap it 4 times and you're doing it on lots of stitches, those 4 wraps become incredibly difficult to move along a cable needle, like a circular cable needle like an Addy Turbo. And so somebody suggested a great solution to that, and so I'm going to use that instead. And that's, I take a much larger size needle, and this happens to be a US 13 needle. And I use that, and I only wrap it twice around that needle, just for the elongated stitch row. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the 32 stitches here, while I talk a little bit about the benefits of using multicolored yarns. So I insert it into the stitch, wrap it twice, and pull both wraps through. Okay? So I'll do that a number of times across the entire row. And one of the things I like to do while I do that is the first wrap, I hold it with my right finger here, and so then I wrap it the second time and hold it again, and so that when I pull through both stitches, or both wraps, it comes through as 1 stitch. It's a much faster and easier way of doing it than the original instructions, where you wrap it around the 1 size needle 4 times instead. You only do it 2 times, and you only use this US 13 needle for this 1 row, which is row 5 in the pattern. So I'm going to head to the end of the row and then come back once I've wrapped all 32 stitches. Great. So now what you see is we have loaded onto the US 13 needle double wrap stitches for all 32. So we in essence have 64 wraps. And turning our work around to start back on the 6th row of the pattern repeat in my Koigu cross stitch pattern, which you can link to in Ravelry in the comments below. What I do is I push these up, trying to keep them in the same order and as uniformly as possible, but it's not that necessary. It just makes it a little easier to push back up onto the Addy Turbo needle. So as that piece increases, the more uniform they are kept, the easier they are to push up on there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to work in groups of 8 stitches to do this cross stitch stitch. And you can see the first stitch right here, it's got the 2 wraps, and we're actually going to insert our needle underneath the first leg of that stitch and just pop it off and onto my right hand needle. I try to keep this a little taut so that it maintains the same level of length in terms of the stitch size. And I'm going to do that for the first 8 stitches, or the first 16 wraps in essence. So I insert it under the first leg of the stitch and just pop it off, so that now I have 2 stitches off. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now we have 8 stitches elongated, pulled off back onto the original size needle. So we're going back to off the 13 needle and onto the US 5 needle in this particular case. And then looking at those 8 stitches, we're going to insert the big needle, the left hand needle, underneath the first 4 stitches of those and lift them over the second 4. So we have 4 over 4 to give us the 4 stitches. And then taking those 4 under stitches that came through, put them back on the right hand needle, and then just knit them in place as they are. So these elongated stitches we're actually just going to knit in place onto the US 5 needle that we pulled them off on. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Great. And so now you can see, as I pull that a little bit more taut, the first one kind of bunches up a little bit on the edge corner, but that's okay. It actually loosens up quite a bit as you start to knit some of the subsequent rows. So we're going to go through that again. So the next 8 grouping of 8, we're going to pop off from the 13 needle onto our US 5 needle, so from the left needle to the right needle. And we do that by inserting into the first leg, popping it off onto the stitch. Now one of the tricks of doing this is keeping the needles that you pop off, the elongated needles, somewhat taut as you possibly can on the right hand needle. So we're going to do all 8. 1, 2, and again I'm keeping it taut. 3, and again I also use my right forefinger to kind of hold those stitches in place and in order, because you want to keep them in the same order. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now by pulling the right needle outwards, like in that direction towards the top of my needle stitches, it keeps them taut and in the same order. If they happen to have crossed and gotten a little bit out of order, you want to adjust that at this point. So for instance, if some of the stitches have like gotten out of order and crossed underneath each other already, like that, you'll see that it's crossed when you pull it taut, and you should adjust that. You should fix that back before you do this next part of the routine. It gets easier and easier to keep these stitches, these elongated stitches, in the proper order, and you get to read your work quite a bit easily as you go ahead and do this. So again, the first 4 stitches now, I'm going to insert my needle underneath the front legs of the first 4 stitches on my right hand needle and lift them over top. And one of the things that I do is I pull down on my work with my thumb down here. I pull down on that as I work these 4 elongated stitches through and underneath the first 4 stitches. And now I've got those cross stitches in place to be able to just do a standard knitting 8 stitches on top of that. We've got 1, 2, 3, 8. And now I'm going to do it fast to show you kind of how I normally do it. I've been making a lot of these scarves for sale at local craft shows, and so I've gotten very fast at doing this particular process. So I'm going to do it fast so you can see that it's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually a relatively easy process to do. 5, 6, 7, 8. Lift the first 4 stitches over the second 4 stitches, put them back on the left-hand needle, and then knit. And if you're still fearing doing this process, it's a little bit easier actually than a cable crossover. If you've ever done stitch transfers or cable crossovers, like if you were to do a 4x4 cable, a 4/4 cable, you literally have to move 4 of the stitches to a different needle, like a cabling needle, to be able to do that. And in this you don't, because you're keeping them constantly on one of the needles and putting them through the stitches instead of in front of or in back of the stitches like a cable crossover would work. It's a little bit easier. So I'm just going to do the last, and then I'll show you the resulting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Cross them underneath. And then knit those 8 stitches in place. A couple things that's nice about this particular stitch is it takes very complex and intricate hand-painted dyed yarns like Koigu, or in this particular case I'm using Groovy Hues fibers. Oops. Groovy Hues fibers, which I've fallen in love with because she does fantastic colorways. And blending her colorways is just a complete joy. But it makes it nice because it makes it so it doesn't pull the colorways, and or at least doesn't pull them in an unpleasant way. You can see when I'm done that it actually does pull the colors a little bit. So you see this green pulling up here a little bit and the orange is pulling up here, but it does it in a really pleasant way when you start to get into an entire scarf where you've done that multiple times. And so you can see that the result is a very sturdy fabric that doesn't worm its way out of place. It actually stays in place and it's secured in through the various things. And you'll also notice that at the top, I can easily carry along the unused yarn up the side of the scarf, or in this case, the side of the scarf, because I've done it long ways. And it actually just melds in with the rest of the scarf and actually provides it a little bit of structure. So if you have any questions, feel free to write comments or subscribe to my videos, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have directly in this forum, or if you want to send me an email directly, you can do that at queerjoe@comcast.net. Great, thanks.